Twisted People. It's your Twisted Girl here, Chauncey K. Robinson, and we are doing a review and analysis slash breakdown of The Last of Us Episode 3. Or, as I would like to call it, the beautiful, beautiful love story of Bill and Frank. Okay, so let's get into it. This episode was officially titled Long, Long Time, and we had pretty much two plots going on in this episode, which I thought was really good. And overall, I'm just gonna say straight out, this was probably my second favorite episode of the season thus far. I'm still going with the first episode being my fave episode thus far, but this one, episode 3, was definitely a very close second for me. It was just beautiful. And I think one of the things that I truly loved about this is one of the reasons why I love sometimes the post apocalyptic horror movie or series is that when done right, it's not always about the monsters, the supernatural monsters. A lot of the great storytelling you get is from the humans and what happens to the human experience in these sort of things. This is why some of the best episodes of Walking Dead sometimes had nothing to do with the zombies themselves, but the people. And I think The Last of Us, thankfully, is playing into that very early on when it comes to the episodes thus far, particularly episode 1 and this episode 3. So I kind of want to divide this up into three parts. I want to talk about Joel and Ellie, and I want to talk about Bill and Frank. And then I kind of want to make some comparisons between the video game and what we got in the series thus far, for the better or the worse. I'm thinking the better thus far, but I want to get into that as well. So yeah, before we get into the beautiful love story that is Bill and Frank, I'm telling you, y'all, I am so mad that these two characters became two of my fave characters only for them to die at the end of this episode. But, that's par for the course when you watch shows like this. You just have to get used to not having some of your fave characters around for very long, so you love them while you can, right? When we come to Joel in particular, we see that he's putting up rocks, which I interpret it as somewhat of a marking of a gravestone, of recognizing Tessa's passing, since her body seemingly blew up in the explosion that we saw in episode 2. And like I said in episode 2, I had really come to I like Tess. She wasn't my fave up to that point, but I think we did see that miniature redemption arc with her, which I really appreciated. So that was great, and it was good to see how we were going to see Joel deal with this mourning, because they weren't overtly romantic, but clearly there was something going on, and we saw a little bit of that a bit more in this episode. Joel is very stoic. And then he goes back to Ellie, and they're in the woods or whatnot. And this was very interesting. I think I want to kind of talk about Joel and Ellie in two separate ways, because I have two very distinct different feelings about each of these characters. I felt like with Joel, Pedro Pascal is doing a great job in terms of just kind of giving those layers in the midst of the stoicism, the stoic nature that he has, because Joel is a hardened man by this time, right? We saw probably the strongest emotion we will be getting out of Joel for some time in the first episode, when he lost Sarah, right? When he broke down. And we haven't really seen that kind of breakdown since, although we sort of saw it a little bit when he was reading Bill's suicide note to him. So we saw a little bit of that, but not on that level. But it lets you see that there's a lot of emotion there still brimming underneath the surface when it comes to Joel. And I think we saw that he's a survivalist. He's moving on. He's figuring out what he wants to do. And in this episode, he's trying to get to Bill and Frank's place, because this is a spot where we find out this is a spot where they've been doing trades for some time, right? So I felt like with Joel this episode, we didn't get a lot of introspection, but we did get little subtle moments. And I really do appreciate that with the show, with his character in particular, that it's not so overt. He's not, giving us soliloquies and monologues, but we are seeing these moments throughout that kind of show the certain layers, how he responds to Ellie in some moments where he can't really figure her out, but it's also like he's not a jerk completely. He's just also in his own way kind of trying to mourn. Now, with that said, we had Ellie this episode, and I was a little worried. I'm not gonna lie, I was a little worried. And I'm going to tell you why I was worried. And that was because I was worried that Ellie, and I'm still a little worried, that Ellie is falling a little bit into the trope of the young person character that just can't listen for their own good, like no matter what. And so because they can't listen for their own good, they get themselves into situations that they really shouldn't be in. Although I think the show in some regards is trying to sort of subvert that a little bit. We saw that when they went to the store where Joel was stashing something, and she basically went underground without telling him. And the first thing I thought, like, this is stupid. I mean, I didn't necessarily think she was going to get into any super danger, but I was just thinking, just the fact that you did that, like, where's your survival skills at? I know you're like 12 or whatever, or 15, but still, right? Um, it was a little annoying. And like I said, I have a little bit of the bias because I'm not the biggest fan of kids in these kind of scenarios. Because, like I said in my last video, I do think sometimes they're used as plot points to foil things so that the other characters are thrown into situations that would normally be avoided. And I was kind of worried that Ellie is kind of gearing herself up to be that kind of character. And I'm like, that's going to be kind of hard if she's like the secondary main character here. It's one thing if it's like, I'm not gonna keep comparing her to Walking Dead. Don't worry. But it's not necessarily. I want to say Carl, who was a young kid in Walking Dead, but it's also kind of like just any kid. They're the young person. Think of some movie where the couple or the father or the mom or whatever had a kid and they just didn't listen, so they got in trouble, and so the mother had to go rescue them, and then she gets bitten or get eaten or something like that because the kid did something, and I feel like we're seeing remnants of that, and I'm kind of not feeling that trope. Although I do feel like it's being subverted just a little bit. It got subverted a little bit in the store because she did not need Joel to come and save her in the store. She came across a an infected being, and she killed it, and that was a little weird. This is another reason, more so plot line wise, that I'm a little worried about Ellie, because she has some remnants of being a little weird, like a little psychopathic kind of weird, right? Like just going up to things, just cutting them, and then like walking away. And I'm like, now I think that might be the plot line a little bit, because she also seemed to kind of like that Joel beat that guy to death when he was threatening them with the gun in the first episode. So I'm sort of thinking maybe this might be part of her characterization, that she might have some tendencies to be a cold-blooded killer in a way, which will actually be interesting. I would prefer for them to lean more into that plot line. Lean more into that. Let's go more into the idea that she's not this kid that just doesn't know any better and keeps getting herself into issues, but more so there might be something a little off about her. I think that might be the more interesting vein for them to follow. So I would be interested in that. What I'm not interested in her being is the hard-headed kid who can't seem to listen when Joel tells her something. That I'm not for. We've seen that so many times. I'd rather not do that. Let her know how to survive a little bit, just a little bit. I mean, she needs Joel for reasons, of course, but you get what I'm saying? I don't need that trope. That trope's played out. But the trope where she might be a little off, yet she might be the person to save the world with the cure in her blood, that's different. Let's go with that. Could you imagine the person that's supposed to save us is also a little kooky, in the sense of they might be a little gray area here, right? That might be cool. Let's go with that. The other thing that threw me off with Ellie was the fact that and maybe this was also of subversion, was when she was about to bring up Tess in the woods, and I think Joel had thought she was going to say sorry or something. He's like, I don't need your sorries. But she was like, I actually wasn't going to say sorry. I was going to say, basically, y'all made this decision, so it's really not my fault, so don't blame me for her being dead, because y'all chose to do this. It's not like you decided to do this out of the kindness of your heart. I was a way to get a trade for a battery you needed, right? So in that sense, I kind of appreciated that. So I'm kind of going back and forth about Ellie. There are moments when I'm like, okay, this is interesting. That's very interesting that she does not feel necessarily sympathy for losing Tess, and that she points out a very good reason. It's cold blooded, but she points out why she does not feel bad. And I was like, wow, I was not expecting her to say that. Good. But then when she does the things occasionally, like this episode where Joel kept telling her, "You are not getting a gun," because I don't even know if she's ever shot a gun, right? She takes a gun. And it's like, that's gonna probably be a problem later. Yeah, that's gonna be a problem later. But maybe it won't. Maybe she'll be a good shot. Maybe they'll subvert it. But I just also wasn't feeling that. I was just like, he told you not to take a gun. You said you were going to listen to his rules, and you're already breaking them, and y'all haven't even gone on the road. This is going to be a headache for no absolute reason. I just don't think plot points like that are necessary for good storytelling. Another cool thing we got in this episode was Joel explaining a little bit more of the outbreak, and I really appreciated this. I thought it was very interesting the fact that he explained that people feel like it got in through the food, bread, cereal, sugar. Oh my gosh. Like, two of the three things I really love, bread and sugar. Um, that was scary in and of itself. I'm like, no, not the bread. Um, I thought that was a very interesting concept because, once again, another scary aspect. Have we not had situations where food had to be recalled and things like that? And just think how avoidable or unavoidable that is. It's bread, it's sugar. It wasn't like they named like fish or like meat, and then it's like, well, hey, us vegetarians are okay. It's like, actually, pretty much everyone eats that. Although with bread, I do try to get gluten free, so maybe I'd be okay. Uh, I do the sugar. So I don't know. No one would be safe. And I feel like they did that on purpose to kind of pick three things where it's like no one would be safe from this. And even if you were safe from not eating that, who's to say that someone around you ate it and doesn't bite you, right? So it's really kind of a scary concept. And I really appreciated that they actually threw that in and that they gave us a glimpse of that. We also got a glimpse into the fact that the military and the government, no big surprise there, fumbled the bag, and they also started getting very draconian and dogmatic in the sense that and tyrant like in the sense that they started killing people that weren't infected. Although we got a glimpse of that in the first episode of how we lost Sarah, R.I.P. Sarah, right? So, but now we find out even more so that they were rounding people up and taking them places to kill them, and we've seen that in history before. So that was very chilling. And so it was a beautiful way in how they connected that into Bill's story. Give it up, A plus, for a great transition to start telling Bill and Frank's story with Joel telling the story. And I thought this was great because it showed how everything's so connected. It seems it's all sprawled out, apocalyptic, everyone's going through their own thing, but actually there's very, intricate overlapping stories because that's how life is, right? So yeah, the bigger crux of the story was Bill and Frank's story by Nick Offerman and Murray Bartlett, who did a beautiful, beautiful job with their chemistry, with the emotions they brought, and you really went through this journey with them. From when we get Bill, who's a prepper, a survivalist, and then they subvert it, right? He's a prepper, he's a survivalist, but he's also gay. And I thought that was awesome. How they kind of subverted that trope, right? And I thought it was cool. You see how smart he is, how ingenious he is, the things that he's able to do. But he's lonely, and also he's never been able to express himself as fully in the sense of love, right? And then Frank comes around, and oh my gosh, like just that dynamic, and you get to see them throughout some of the negative times. We think Bill's about to die that way because he got shot, but he doesn't die. And then it jumps ahead another 10 years. So we got to spend about 16 or so years with this beautiful couple of opposites, right? And it was just so well done. And I think it just showed, I think it was well done in the sense that it showed this idea of love coming through in some of the harshest of times. And I don't think it romanticized the whole idea of what ended up happening to them. I don't think that was necessarily the romantic aspect, and I hope no one took that, and I hope no one acts like it romanticized it, because I don't think that's what it was at all. I think it was just this idea that we saw this character Bill grow from someone who was kind of cold, kind of awkward, to someone who truly found love with someone else. And it was just a beautiful, beautiful story, and you couldn't help but get teary eyed. And I did not think I was gonna get teary eyed again after all, so soon after the first episode. It's like, at least give me 3 episodes in between before I'm crying again, guys. Because I cried when Sarah died, and I definitely cried during the Frank and Bill situation, and it was just such a beautiful, beautiful story. And for one, I actually appreciate the fact that they go back in time, because when Joel loses Sarah, they jump 20 years, and there's a lot of stuff that had to have happened in between that time. So I really do appreciate that the show is doing this thing of showing you stories of what happened in these years for people, because life did happen. Do I think that there's a way that that could fall into being sort of a distraction or it derails the story? It really doesn't, because I feel like this really connects to the story, and this isn't about trying to just rush to the part of getting Ellie to her destination. Really, Joel and Ellie's trip is really just a way, not just, but it's a way for us to see other stories in the apocalypse, right? And so I think that's a good vehicle of the way they're using it. So I was glad we got to see Bill and Frank's story, and hopefully we'll see more stories throughout, depending on who they come across and whatnot. This was one of the strongest episodes, and we hardly saw an infected. I mean, that's just good storytelling right there. We also finally in the episode get to hear Joel's plan, which is to find his brother, and who is an ex Firefly revolutionary fighter and whatnot, and then hopefully connect him to Ellie so that he can connect Ellie to some other Firefly. So it's kind of a 2-for-1 deal that Joel's thinking. And so that's fine. It's a road trip to get to Wyoming. So that's the next step. That's where we're at. And I'm sure we'll come across plenty of other stories throughout, right? As they world build. That's the other thing. There's a world building thing going on here. And that's really beautiful, because I think I was a little worried when they were saying they were sticking so close to the video game that it would almost seem very streamlined. And especially since I'm still a little on the fence about Ellie as a character, I was like, I don't know if we could just focus on just this the whole time. So I'm happy that we're getting other storylines of other characters, because we're getting introduced to some really amazing characters in this show thus far. And so that's really good, and I think they're going to have to keep doing that, because I don't know if Ellie is a strong enough character yet to make it so that she's very much the only focal point, right? Great thing we have Joel there, but he's still working through his stuff. So I think they're going to need other characters for us to get those glimpses of, to kind of get that feel of the storytelling. That's my opinion thus far on that. I'm not hating on Ellie. I'm just saying that needs a little bit more development. So I'm glad we're getting other characters to spend time with each episode. So in terms of the video game versus the show, there was a major difference in how they portrayed Bill and Frank's story, which I think was definitely for the better. In the video game, it's a kind of a challenge, because Joel and Ellie go there because they need the battery from Bill in order to, service the car that they want to start driving. Now, that still played out in the show, but in a totally different manner. In the game, Bill was still alive. Frank had offed himself because he had gotten bitten, and there was kind of a more tension-filled relationship they had, and it was way more subtle that Bill and Frank were gay. I love that the show decided to expand on that and really just develop their love story and really dedicate a whole episode to them, and it worked so well. So I definitely think it was for the better. And it was still sad, and Frank still, goes. And in this particular version, Bill goes too, because in the game, he's still technically alive, even though you never see him again in the game. But this way we have a thing of, at least they were together, I guess. It's still sad. And I do get that it can still play on the tropes of bury your gays, which is a trope, right? Where it's like, if you have a gay character, you probably just expect that they have a tragic story and they're going to die. So it was really good, I think, in this episode that Bill, in talking to Frank about him also taking the pills, and saying, this isn't the tragic end for a character. This is, I had a purpose. You gave me a purpose. And so now I'm just finishing that off. And I thought that was beautiful. I don't condone what they both did, but I can understand it. And I think it's, you could blanketly say, "Oh, that's a bury your gays trope," but I don't think it's necessarily the same thing, and not done in an exploitative way, which the bury the gays trope usually does, right? So I think this was done with a lot more dignity. Let me know if you were fine with that, if you still think it falls into the trope, if you would have preferred that maybe that not happen for them. But I was okay with that. Overall, this episode was a solid A for me. Very much up there with episode 1. Episode 2, I would give that like a B, but episode 1, it was an A plus. Episode 3 has been definitely an A. Definitely, definitely, definitely. And so I am enjoying things thus far, and I'm enjoying this show. All right, y'all. So that's my review and analysis of episode 3 of The Last of Us. Let me know your thoughts. What was your favorite part of this episode? Did you like this episode? Did you kind of hate this episode? And what do you think about what I said about Ellie? Do you think do you think there needs to be space to develop her more, or do you love her already as is? Let me know. Comment down below. And remember, keep it twisted out there.